I got my autism diagnosis over a year ago. That doesn't seem like a very long time to understand that I'm autistic and to go through all the motions, and that's because I knew I was autistic before I got a diagnosis. Depending on where you are in the world, it might be different for you, but in general, the diagnosis process for things like autism is not easy. It takes a very long time. I'm in the UK, which means the NHS has lots of waiting lists, and this means that by the time people get diagnosed, they've often waited years, some people waiting up to 5 years for diagnoses, and that means that we have to do a lot of research ourselves before actually getting a diagnosis. So I wanted to talk about why I got a diagnosis and what it actually did for me. I went and I seeked out my own diagnosis. I had to go privately because the services in my area closed, which meant they weren't any, which makes it very difficult to get a diagnosis because there isn't even anywhere to refer to. Never mind going through the waiting list, there wasn't even a waiting list. But yeah, I got my autism diagnosis early 2024 in January. So it's been a while and I want to share the things that it's affected and why I actually got it, even though I already knew I was autistic. I think the biggest thing that actually getting a diagnosis gave me was validation. That can be something that neurotypical people or people who haven't had to seek a diagnosis might not understand, because why would you want a label? Why would you want, all these things on your medical records? Why do you want to be put into a category? Can you not just exist? Why do you have to name it? And I completely get that side of the argument, especially with how negatively autism is portrayed, especially in neurotypical society. But for me, having a diagnosis and having a name to the way I work, to the way my brain works, to explain what was going on, it really allowed me to understand and forgive myself. Before I had my diagnosis, and before I accepted that I was autistic and that I kind of officially figured it out, I really used to beat myself up about the way I acted. I am a high masking person. I am a typical autistic woman who's been high masking and was the straight A student, quiet, shy, anxious kid. I am very much that autistic stereotype, which means that I didn't get diagnosed. Nobody knew that I was autistic, and I pretty much passed as just neurotypical but a bit anxious, which meant that I didn't understand why I didn't fit in. And even though I could kind of scrape through, I could kind of mask so much that I did have neurotypical friends, I did okay in school, I did socialise with people, it still didn't go well. And even when it looked okay from the outside, there was so much going on internally in my brain. There was so much confusion and lack of acceptance, and like friendships were just a complete shit show for me, for lack of better words, which meant that I was constantly beating myself up for that. I was constantly questioning why I couldn't function, why didn't people like me, why are my friendships failing, am I just bad at it? And I think getting my diagnosis allowed me to free myself from that guilt, and it allowed me to forgive myself and just understand that I'm not bad at things, I'm not a bad friend, I'm just autistic and I just needed different things. But yeah, I definitely think that my diagnosis just gave me the confidence in myself and the fact that I was autistic. It gave me the validation to know that I definitely am. I have been tested, I've been through all the things, psychologists, they have told me that yes, that is the way your brain works. And so scientifically, like on medical record, I am autistic, so I can forgive myself for all the times that I didn't understand something, or I had to ask more questions, or I did something a different way to someone else. There was a reason for that, and it's not that I'm doing anything wrong, I just do things differently. And I think having professional medical advice and someone telling me you are autistic and describing all my traits but also framing it in a way that didn't make them sound like deficits. It's just a social difference, not a social deficit. And that was really, really helpful. One of the other really big reasons I wanted to get a diagnosis was because I didn't quite feel validated with just my self-diagnosis. As someone who needs a lot of reassurance, a lot of validation from other people to make sure that I'm making the right decision, I need a lot of input, a lot of research. I really wanted to have the backing of a diagnosis so that I felt comfortable integrating with like the autistic community, for example. Because of my content, I'm someone who posts to a lot of people, and I didn't feel comfortable sharing, I'm autistic this, autistic that, autism this, autism that. I didn't want to share lots about it when I didn't have, the official words saying that I was autistic. I wanted just to make sure, just in case, which, I mean, thinking about it is probably a bit of an autistic trait. I wanted to just make sure that I had all of that so that I can explain myself better to people, so that I didn't feel like people could second guess me. It gave me the confidence in myself to know that I don't need validation from anybody else. I know my brain, the doctors know my brain, and they have told me about that. They've told me how to work with it, and now I can Google how to work with autistic people, or, you know, I've done a course on autism, so I can better understand the exact way that my brain functions, and that can help me implement it into my day-to-day life. And I've found it really helpful to actually have the validation so that I'm not second-guessing myself, or so that I can just block out the people who tell me that I'm not autistic, or people that tell me, you're not autistic because you're not like my child who's autistic. I can just block that out because I know that I am. Even though you're valid either way, I think that was a really important step for me to make personally, and I think some people might relate to that. Another reason I got an actual autism diagnosis, an official paper, was because it's going to help a lot with things like applying for exam regulations, which I don't need anymore because I'm not in education. I'm turning 20 this year. This doesn't affect me as much anymore, but still for things like if I ever get a job and I want to, you know, prove that I need a certain accommodation for my autism, I can prove that with a medical paper, and it just helps for applying for things. Or if you're someone who wants to apply for like disability benefit, if it really impacts your life, you're gonna need formal diagnoses for that. So anything official, having the actual documentation really helps. So if you're maybe in school and you need a separate room for exams or extra time, or you want fidget toys in class, or, you know, anything you have to kind of apply for, a formal diagnosis can be really useful, and sometimes it's actually necessary. So that could be a really big reason for someone wanting an official diagnosis. It's definitely something to think about if you're thinking about getting diagnosed. But there are pros and cons. I know that some countries do have kind of restrictions on if you're autistic on your medical records. Some places, I don't know the exact examples because I'm from the UK and this doesn't impact us, but some places might not take you on as an employee, or I'm pretty sure there are certain countries who may not accept you in residency. I don't think you can apply to live in certain countries if you're autistic on your medical records. Don't quote me on that. I heard it somewhere once. I will have to do some research. I know that some people, especially parents of autistic children, they kind of a little bit fearmonger around having an autistic label because it could be limiting. But personally, I think especially in this day and age, having an autism diagnosis can be more empowering than it is restricting, especially if we have understanding about autism. But with all the stuff that's going on in America at the minute and the whole eugenics movement, which is that's another video. If you haven't heard about it, go research it. With all that coming in, it is a little bit scary, and I suppose that does bring up the question of whether having an official diagnosis could be more of a dangerous thing, especially going into the future. You have to weigh up the pros and cons, and if it's going to help you right now, then it's something to look into. But I think you don't need an official autism diagnosis to understand your brain, and that is something that I really want to promote and talk to people about, because self-diagnosis is valid if it's well researched, and I think most autistic people who are researching are gonna do it well. I've probably known for 2-3 years that I was autistic, and I started to insert myself into the autistic community. I was already in the disabled neurodivergent community because of my Tourette's content, because of my FND stuff. The chronic illness community does overlap with the neurodivergent community, and so I was coming across so many autistic people that I got on so well with, and I was like, the brainwaves are brainwaving, and I think that was what made me realise that I have found my people. It just so happens that all my friends that I was getting on really well with were autistic, and that did give me the push, the confidence to think, I think I'm autistic too. But even then, I think I slowly learnt to unmask, and I was accepting myself more and more, even without a diagnosis, just because I was kind of interacting with the autistic community. And in general, it is a pretty accepting place, so even if you don't have a diagnosis, you don't need a formal one, you don't need a piece of paper to prove who you are. And being autistic, you know, it is a part of you, it's how you act, it's who you are. It's not a condition that you have, it's not something that you have to fix, or it's not something you have to separate from yourself if you don't want to. It is just who you are, and if you know that you have certain traits, you don't have to name them if you don't want to, but you can accommodate just by knowing where it comes from. So if you are questioning about autism, if you think you're autistic too, I hope you can get the advice, the accommodations that you need, whether that's with a diagnosis or not, but maybe this gives you a bit of insight into why I made that decision. If you do want to know about my autism diagnosis and the path that I went through, and a little bit about like NHS versus private healthcare, I did a whole video on my journey, my autism diagnosis, so you can go watch that if you do want to. Let me know if you have any questions, put them in the comments below and I can make some more videos about my autism journey. Or if you have any questions about neurodiversity or disability, anything else that I make content on, feel free to drop them down below and I can make a video about it. I'm trying to get more into my long form content again, so I'm going to do more videos like this. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed, I hope that was interesting, and I will see you next time. Bye.